Okay, so let's unpack this. We are diving deep into a pedal that, well, on the surface, looks almost ridiculously simple, doesn't it? One transistor, one knob. But it's actually fundamental, I think, to understanding the early DNA, maybe even the genius, of electroharmonics.
Absolutely.
Today, yeah, the focus is the EHX Screaming Bird treble booster. And our mission, really, is clear. Figure out how this, well, relatively overlooked device from the early 1970s, how it shaped EHX's product catalog.
Right.
And maybe more critically, how it provided guitarists with this specialized sound option, something maybe they didn't even know they needed at the time.
Yeah, and when you look at the Screaming Bird, you're not just looking at some piece of vintage here. You're kind of witnessing the birth of a product line built on iteration.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Iteration, okay.
Mike Matthews, he'd already sort of nailed the core idea with the linear power booster, right? The LPB1.
Yeah, the class.
The Screaming Bird is just a perfect example of EHX taking that successful, simple circuit and transforming it, making these frequency-specific tools out of it.
Ah, okay.
This modular design philosophy, reuse the core, change maybe one key component. That was basically the blueprint for how they built their brands so quickly and profitably, too.
That modular approach. Yeah, that seems like the key insight we have to keep coming back to here. So let's set the scene a bit. Early 70s New York. The Screaming Bird pops up shortly after its sibling, the Screaming Tree. So Matthews' goal with this whole family of effects was what? To push that LPB1 idea beyond just clean volume.
Exactly. Way beyond just clean gain. He wanted to get into deliberate, frequency-shaped boosts.
And this wasn't just like R&D for its own sake, right? It was solving a real problem.
Oh, absolutely. It solved a massive practical issue for guitarists back then.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're playing live, maybe in a, 3 or 4 piece rock band.
Yeah.
And your amp, maybe it's a classic Fender, maybe an older tube model.
Yeah.
It's inherently kind of warm or dark sounding.
He was lost easily.
Instantly swallowed, by the bass and drums. So the Screaming Bird was designed specifically to fix that, to dramatically brighten up those darker amps and give you that intense upper mid-range punch you needed to cut through a really dense live mix.
So EHX is basically making this sort of surgical tool for your tone. But they weren't alone in thinking about treble boosting, were they? This was already a concept, especially overseas.
Oh, definitely. You got to place this pedal historically. For years, the sort of gold standard in that specific frequency boosting niche was the British Dallas Rangemaster.
Yeah, the Rangemaster. Legendary.
Revered, But it was also pretty expensive and sometimes just hard to get hold of in the U.S.
Right.
So the Screaming Bird enters the market as this budget-friendly, super accessible American alternative to that whole Rangemaster tradition. It filled a really competitive niche, offering that essential high-end articulation.
But cheap,
while keeping EHX's core identity as this affordable, kind of scrappy, volume-driven New York brand.
Okay, this is where I get really curious. If the goal was to compete with something like the Rangemaster, how did they get a similar result while keeping the circuit so incredibly simple? Let's get under the hood a bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because the technical design of the Screaming Bird, it was just a simple one-transistor boost circuit.
It was almost a photocopy of the LPB1 circuit. Seriously. Think of the LPB1 as like the standardized engine block for EHX back then. This standardization meant they could churn out new products with minimal retooling. Just swap a few components.
Smart business.
Very smart. But here's the critical pivot. The moment of, let's call it engineering insight, that makes the Screaming Bird what it is, the specific tuning of the coupling capacitors.
The coupling capacitor. Okay, that's the term you always hear mentioned. But what does that actually mean for someone who isn't, an electrical engineer? Why do these little parts matter so much?
Okay, great question. This is where we stop thinking just about volume and start thinking about maybe frequency gates or filters.
Filters, okay.
In a circuit like this, coupling capacitors act like filters. They sit between the transistor stages, right?
Yeah.
And they basically determine which frequencies are allowed to pass easily from one stage to the next. In your standard LPB1, those capacitors are usually chosen to pass a pretty full range of sound bass, vids, treble, so you just get more volume overall.
Right. It's like opening the tap fully, just more of everything.
Exactly. But for the Screaming Bird, they tuned those coupling capacitors very differently, specifically to emphasize the upper mids and the treble frequencies. Crucially, They act as a high-pass filter.
High pass, letting the highs pass through.
Right. Imagine you put this little gate in the circuit that actively restricts the lower bass frequencies from passing through easily. By cutting those bass frequencies out, you don't just reduce the mud, you make the existing mid-range and treble frequencies sound way louder and more prominent relative to the whole signal.
Whoa, okay, so it's not just boosting the treble, it's actually aggressively removing the bass, so the treble just dominates.
But that's a huge difference in what it does. Totally different utility. That single component change created an entirely new sonic tool for the player, all while keeping that dead simple original layout.
Amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of simplicity, the original form factor is like a huge part of the story too.
Oh yeah, the little plug-in ones.
Those tiny plug-in units, yeah. They literally plug straight into the guitar jack, just dangling off the side of your instrument.
They look almost comical now, you know? We're so used to these sturdy metal boxes on the floor. What was that like, practically, using something that size just hanging off your guitar?
Well, they were certainly cheap to produce, right? And extremely portable, which definitely fed into that affordable brand identity EHX was building.
Sure.
But practically, yeah, they were a bit unwieldy. I mean, if you knocked your guitar or moved around suddenly, you could easily risk damaging the jack or the unit itself.
Ouch.
Yeah. And it kind of forced the musician to treat the effect as just a simple, always-on kind of tone adjustment, you know? Not really something you could easily tap on and off mid-song like a floor pedal.
So it really reinforces that idea of it being a quick fix for articulation, not some dynamic performance tool.
Exactly. Though we should note, EHX did eventually make some later versions in the larger, more conventional EHX wedge-style pedal format. But that little plug-in unit, that's the real historical marker.
And regardless of the size, the controls were just ultra minimal, just that one knob for the boost amount. Simplicity personified.
Couldn't get simpler.
Which brings us right to the sound profile. Because with only one knob, the player is relying entirely on how hard they push that boost, right? Which seems to create this real sonic duality. What happens at the lower settings?
At lower settings, it's actually pretty nuanced. It acts beautifully as just a definition tool.
Definition. Okay.
Yeah, like if you're using dark humbucker pickups or maybe your amp's just inherently warm, that little bit of emphasis on the high frequencies adds sparkle and definition. But it doesn't feel abrasive, you know?
Yeah.
It just kind of cleans up and polishes the sound, makes individual notes really distinct.
Nice. But then you start cranking that single knob past noon, and I imagine everything changes pretty drastically.
Oh, absolutely. You crank that dial up, and because you're pushing primarily only those high frequencies into the amp, it transitions instantly into this really biting, aggressive treble boost.
Not just louder, but different.
Totally different. It doesn't just make your amp louder. It specifically overloads the tubes with high-end energy, pushing the amp into this searing, really edgy kind of distortion, that harsh, almost razor-sharp lead tone, sound like glass shattering. That's the Screaming Bird pushed hard.
Oh, okay. So this brings us back to the EHX family tree then.
Yep.
You had the LPB1, the foundation, the clean volume benchmark.
Right.
You had the Screaming Tree, which was also a treble booster, sometimes described as more EQ style. And then the Screaming Bird. What was the critical difference between the bird and the tree? I mean, why potentially confuse customers with two different screaming boxes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it gets right to the heart of their market segmentation, I guess.
Okay.
So the LPB1 was just full range volume, clean boost. The Screaming Tree offered a slightly broader high-frequency boost. It gave you a more general sense of presence and brightness. The EQ slope was maybe a bit gentler.
Okay.
The Screaming Bird, however, because of the specific capacitor choices that aggressively cut the low end, it was specifically the brightest and most cutting of the three. No question.
Okay, so if the tree was maybe for generalized brightness or presence, the bird was like a laser beam, surgical attack.
Precisely. It carved out its own little niche for maximum articulation. If your number one goal was cutting through a really dense live mix, or if you needed a lead tone that absolutely, positively would not be mistaken for the rhythm guitar,
Yeah.
the Screaming Bird was the tool for the job. It was definitely the sharpest tool in that early EHX drawer for that specific purpose.
So if we look at its legacy, we kind of have to acknowledge it never quite achieved the, the widespread fame of the Big Muff.
Oh, not even close.
Or even the foundational LPB1, maybe. It wasn't the centerpiece of a whole genre or anything, and yet it still feels really critical to the EHX story.
It's definitely an important branch on that early plug-in booster family tree. It really shows that EHX wasn't just relying on one or two big hits, you know. They were methodically building a whole arsenal of sounds.
Right.
Originals are certainly collectible now. I mean, that little plug-in format is just visually iconic.
It is cool looking.
Yeah, but they are generally less expensive than, say, early big muffs or the very first LPB units. Probably because they were made in higher numbers, and maybe they didn't land in the hands of quite as many famous early recording artists.
Still sought after, though. And thankfully, EHX eventually realized that while the tone was indispensable, maybe that original form factor needed a bit of an update for the modern player.
Exactly. They finally revived the unit in the late 2000s, right?
Wow.
And they incorporated it into their compact Nano series pedals.
Yeah, the Nano pedals are great.
Huge benefit for pedal board friendliness, obviously. And the great thing is the reissue stayed entirely true to that original, really uncompromising bright boost voicing.
Yeah.
You know, derived from the vintage circuit.
So it still sounds like a screaming bird.
Oh, yeah. But they added the modern stuff we kind of demand today, like much better reliability and, importantly, true bypass switching. It's basically the classic sound, just made ready for the road again.
Okay, so let's sort of bring this deep dive home then. Let's hit the so. Why does this simple one-transistor pedal, driven by these tiny capacitor choices, why does it matter so much in the broader sweep of effects history, particularly for the success of EHX?
Yeah, I think we can boil its importance down to maybe three crucial points.
Yeah.
First, it just perfectly demonstrated EHX's foundational business model, that modular product strategy we talked about.
Right.
They created profitable and distinct variations on a successful, established circuit, the LPB1, super quickly and efficiently.
They basically optimized their R&D by reusing that core design over and over again. Smart.
Super smart. Second, and this is really crucial for the player back in, it provided essential frequency-focused boost options years before dedicated multi-band graphic EQ pedals were common, or affordable, or even practical on a small pedal board.
Ah, good point.
They gave guitarists targeted tone shaping when pretty much their only other option was just general volume or fiddling with their amp knobs.
So they kind of democratized focused high-end tone shaping in a way.
In a way, yeah. And third, by doing all this, the Screaming Bird made sure EHX stayed competitively relevant against those European treble boost traditions like the Rangemaster we mentioned.
Right.
They offer that crucial, aggressive, high-end tone, but they do it while retaining their unique identity as this accessible, affordable New York brand. It's really a complete testament to how smart, simple design can sometimes beat complexity every single time.
It really is an amazing illustration, isn't it? How such a minimal internal tweak, just swapping out those capacitors to function as that aggressive high-pass filter, could transform a fundamental clean boost circuit into this completely new, and for many players, indispensable sonic tool. The Screaming Bird might have looked simple, but its utility for cutting through the mix was anything but simple.
Yeah, and it kind of raises an important question maybe for you to think about. Why do these small, sometimes almost forgotten single knob devices from the early 70s still have such an enduring power? Even in the modern era, you know, how did prioritizing just one specific frequency range that really focused upper, mid, and treble slice create such a necessary and classic tool? One that still defines articulation and lead guitar today, even decades after complex, multi-band digital EQs became totally commonplace. Something to chew on.